task force that is dealing with some very important issues when we talk about Latino education, education for Latino children throughout our state, and I think actually for the whole country in many aspects too. And through our discussions on this task force, there's always been a talk about what we do to preserve and encourage, and I would say encourage our young people to consider being bilingual. You know, in history that some of our families have had, my family, I was not raised speaking Spanish, but I heard it because my grandpa, that's all he spoke. In order to communicate, I had to figure out how to do this. But my mom and dad during the 1920s and early 30s were punished severely for speaking in Spanish here in the state. And that was done by the Sisters of Loreto and others who ran our school system at that time, and they were punished very severely for speaking in Spanish. So in doing so, as you know, as children, that changes the way we think sometimes, and to them, you know, speaking English was the way you had to. And in many instances, I think that had an opportunity for us to begin to lose some of that cultural feeling. And it does happen. It doesn't mean if you're Spanish or German or whichever, that you begin to lose that mother tongue. There's that blending sometimes of the culture into what we call the American culture, which I could talk ad nauseum about that one. Anyway, sitting on this task force and with realizing what I've come through, my neighborhood is multicultural where I live. We speak Spanish, English, and Italian, and I think a few other languages out there in my own little neighborhood. But realizing that in order to understand and feel as a community, you sometimes have to understand what that person's culture is, and to me, language is important. So I have been talking to folks over the last couple of years, actually, and even more so this year, in that New Mexico is the only state in the Union that has a guarantee in our Constitution for bilingual education. We are the only state in this whole union that is not an English-only state. And for me, I kind of threw this bill that I have right now that talks about a dual language requirement for any high school student when they graduate starting in 2014 to have proficiency in 2 languages. So English, of course, is the basis. I mean, that's going to be granted. But a student could choose Spanish, a student could choose Italian, Chinese, whichever it may be, but there would be a requirement for dual language proficiency. And in all the studies and things that most of us have read, you understand Europe does it. The other side of the Atlantic does it very well, and I don't think they're any dumber. They're any less than. In fact, I think they do us a favor in learning English just to try to communicate with us. And to me, it's nothing wrong. I think we should. We should be celebrating bilingualism even more for those who are even more talented that could take the time to learn more languages. So for that, I've introduced a bill, and that was one of the recommendations I know from the task force that went to the governor, but it didn't get on the radar. But I introduced it, and of course it's not germane this year. Just because of other things, there's no message that has been given by the governor for it to be considered, even though I stuck some cash on there to try and ask, but we don't have any money anyway. But at least it's dropped in, and I believe at least as we go through this next few years down the road, you have to start somewhere. And I know that people are beginning to see that, and I got a few others who've asked me some questions about it, and you have to start a conversation. So for me, being bilingual is so important. I think it helps to develop our brain, helps us to learn about other cultures, and kind of comes to more understanding of who we are as a people in this whole world that we live in. Long story to the question.